everybody. I'm Jamie O'Quinn, and I'm joined by another graduate student in the department, Vrinda Marwah, and we were asked to interview Gloria González-López because she won the very prestigious Simon Gagnon Lifetime Achievement Award from the ASA section on sexuality. And she is not only the first Latina to ever win this award, but I just discovered she is the first person of color to ever win this award, which is mind-boggling. And we are all so unbelievably proud of her. And so we've joined today to talk more about sexuality and sociology and all of her wonderful research. So thank you so much for sitting down with us, Gloria.
Oh, hello, Jamie, Vrinda, thank you. Oh, it is an honor. It is an honor to be with you today, and it was definitely an honor to receive the award. It's a huge honor. It's very humbling. It's very special.
We are celebrating the legacy of your work in shaping the field of sexualities research, a field that is largely marginalized in sociology. We spoke to several of your colleagues when we were preparing for this interview, and one thing that Christine Williams identifies as fundamental and distinctive about your research is that you study people's actual sex lives, not just broader discourses about sexuality. And you're not afraid to take on extremely complex social problems like incest in Mexican families that need a lot of care to handle. Can you speak to how you approach this work and to best practices generally for sexuality researchers?
I think for me, well, I've learned from my own mentors, you know, and I have been incredibly fortunate to have really wonderful mentors. Also, you know, feminist sociologists who are also public intellectuals. And I think for me, the idea is, or something that I learned is to really work on areas that need special attention that are urgently needed. And I think that that's kind of the motivation. I think in the beginning, when I was a student and I didn't know what to do for my dissertation, and I'll share with you that story. You know, I went through my training in sociology, and I also did my training in couple and family therapy, and all of the work I did, and most of the work I did was with women. And I used to facilitate a women's group. And back then, you know, I was taking also feminist theory. So this is kind of the late 90s. And I remember when we read anything, we rarely, you know, would have publications on Latinas or sexuality, etc. And I used to facilitate this group, you know, as part of my clinical training, you know, some Latina women in LA, in an inner city barrio, you know, location. And I remember, you know, they would talk about different issues. And then I noticed that, you know, they developed this really close relationship, but they didn't talk about sexuality. And at the same time, in my own feminist theories class, I always felt some kind of marginalized. So I was trying like to figure out what I wanted to do. And I remember when I came to my advisor, and that must have been probably 96, 97. And I said, you know, the women I've been working with, they are really interested in sexuality. And she said, Gloria, that's your professional future. And I go, really? And I go, like, can I really study sexuality? She said, yeah, people study sexuality and sociology, and, you know, Foucault and Freud. And I go like, yeah, but those are kind of the men, white men, you know, the European white men. And then she said, you know, there's a student who's also working on sexuality, and his name is Lionel Cantu, and he's working on his dissertation. And I was like, wow, so I can really study sexuality? He says, yes, of course. And we actually need that. You know, we don't have the lives of immigrants have been traditionally desexualized and this and that, you know. And So I feel like society, people have been giving me the answers to my intellectual questions. And that's the way it has happened to me. It's just like society was telling me, this is what we care about, what's relevant, what's important. And then that's how it happened with the first big project, my dissertation, and then the most recent one on sexual violence. And I think this idea of being intellectually curious and also this idea of becoming teachable. Like when I was working on my dissertation and I had all of these ideas about sexuality or preconceived notions or whatever I read, on gender and Mexican women, whatever. And then I'm asking them questions about, their sex lives. And I remember this woman so well, and I'm asking her, about her sex life and immigration. And she's like, what are you talking about, sex? We don't have time for that. I'm busy working all the time and this and that. And that's an entire section in the first book. And I was like, wow, So then this idea of really approaching, so what's highly needed, what's coming from, again, society, communities, I care about, or the people who are, close to me, which was also, of course, a recommendation coming from my mentor, back then. And it really resonated with me. I was actually, had some sort of echo in my heart, this idea of working on that. But I think this idea of just approaching this with genuine curiosity, becoming teachable, thinking about the ways in which this is going to be of help to these communities, even though the first project, it was about academic survival, because then it's about getting tenure at some point, etc., right? So then you're also writing for an academic audience that is going to evaluate your work. I think that's kind of the foundation, now that I'm thinking about this in retrospect. Also, when I was discovering my passion, when I was discovering my curiosity, my professional destiny, I interviewed, had, brief conversations also with people who were already doing sexuality research, because I was concerned how people were going to perceive me, because you're studying sexuality. And I remember talking to sex therapists. I remember I interviewed a sex therapist, and he said, Gloria, we're stigmatized. When you conduct sexuality research, you're stigmatized. So it's not easy, but there's actually the Society for the Scientific Study of Sexuality. So then there's a lot of people who study sexuality professionally speaking. So then this idea of also taking a risk, which is also what I think my life has been about. So it's been kind of a combination. So it was also personal, but also professional. But then within the professional is the academic and also this public sociology dimension. And I have been incredibly fortunate to have wonderful mentors as well. And people, other peers, friends, colleagues, students when I was a student, people who were there. So I had a community that was, there for me. So I think it's been kind of a combination, the way to approach and ethics. So I think that those are kind of the lessons in retrospect. And it has not been easy. I think this idea of also taking risks, but also being really open to what my mentors have been teaching me all along. In the beginning, it was really important. And then, of course, at some point, you're by yourself, and it is very special. I think this is the other thing that is, I think it's really special, like sexualities, being marginalized within our profession, but then also because of, who I am as a person, also navigating the margins. So it's been like the margins are kind of, that's my life. Mm-hmm. So that has helped me tremendously, just to have some of those life skills to be able to navigate the margins. Mm. The margins in the profession, in the discipline, the kind of research that I have conducted. And then how all of that has interwoven with my own life. But yes, so I think that's the that's been my experience, you know. I hope that answers
the commitment that you've demonstrated throughout your career to public sociology and working very closely with feminist activists, both in Mexico and the US. You mentioned right now that you were led by the need to conduct research that's urgent. So and you continue to do this as a volunteer, as an academic consultant for nonprofits, grassroots groups in Mexico that work on violence against women. So just from a lifetime of doing this, what advice would you give researchers who also want to use their skills to advance social change?
Yeah, I think what I've learned, I think that life lessons is to truly care. We have, a huge collection of social problems, but I think it's important to be touched, to be moved. Like in my case, I think that as a feminist, as someone who studies, gender inequality, as someone who is moved by the human suffering of girls, women, cis women of all, ages, and also, of course, other human beings who may not fit the categories that we have, for gender at this moment. People who are, marginalized because of gender and the entire, interconnection of forces, dynamics, etc. I think for me is in my case, I have been deeply moved by the ways in which sexual violence is used to control, damage, hurt, just really give a tremendous amount of pain to people within these structures of inequality. So I think for me, one of the things is the big lesson is that I truly care about them. Like I care. It's just something that touches me deeply. It goes beyond the books. It's something very personal. It's like this idea of the personal is political, the political is personal. It's like the personal is academic. It's like the academic is personal. It's about how you feel different experiences of gender inequality. Like I know, some of professors, researchers who study gender inequality and work, who truly care about marginality and work, or unemployment, or illness and gender inequality, or disability and gender inequality. And I know them, you know them, people who truly care, like who are deeply moved. So this I think the first lesson I've learned is that I have been, I am moved. I have been touched. I have been moved by that. So that's one. I think this idea of establishing a relationship with activists that is a feminist relationship, no hierarchy. I think that has helped me, tremendously. This idea of truly engaging in feminism in those relationships. Like I am going to give you an example. When I was working on the incest project, I had just arrived in Mexico City. I had a meeting, my first meeting with the director of a big NGO and working on these themes. And she confronted me. She said, are you like those researchers who come and then, get all their data and then they disappear and we never see them again? Are you like that? And I was like, no, I'm the public sociologist and the feminist and engaged research and blah, blah, blah. And she was very serious. And then so I told her, it seems like you feel like you have been exploited or people have taken advantage of you. And she said, yeah, they have. And I said, okay, so what would help you feel like there's some sort of reciprocity between us? And then she said something. She said, teach me what you know. And then I was like, well, what I know is I know about feminism, I know about, sexual violence, something about research. I shared that, with her. And she said, oh, great. So why don't you give us a seminar? And I said, yeah, that's great, a seminar. So in my mind, it was just like a seminar in the afternoon, maybe 2-3 hours. And she said, no, give us a seminar while you're here. And I was like, okay, like twice a week. Yeah, so I established that kind of conversation with them. But then the thing is, that's when you realize that the community engagement that public sociology, the public intellectual, you're always in community. You do not come in and out. It's like you're always there. I think that's another lesson, just always being present. Exploring ways in which the feminist fantasy, what the feminist imagination would look like in real life. This question of how can I help? How can I be of help? Like now with the COVID, what's been happening, because we're isolation with all this social isolation and confinement, etc. The incidence of violence against girls and women has gone up, right? I've been in communication with some of these activists, with the activists I've been working with, like, how are you doing? What's going on? And then by now they are my friends as well. So then, it's also, this idea of exploring ways to be creative. I think that's the other thing that I've learned from this pandemic, that creativity has been part of my survival as an academic, as a feminist, and now, that we're going through this, pandemic. So I think it's the creativity also, and think outside the box. So then this idea of being creative, intellectually, socially, emotionally, I think it's this idea of being open to other possibilities. But I think it's this idea of always nurturing the relationship. And it's so interesting because, there's the books and articles on all of this. But what I'm sharing with you, I've learned that through my own experience, For me, they have been taking care of me. That's been also my self-care. It's community care. There's no self. It's just like we're taking care of ourselves, I think at some point you let go of yourself, just like gone. And then you I've learned to establish those relationships that have also helped me take care of myself. So it has had different functions, I think. Because of those relationships, they have been taking care of me. Like I remember in the past years back, I remember some of my friends in Ciudad Juarez would say, Gloria, there's a lot of violence in the city. Don't come to Juarez now. Or don't come soon. We'll let you know when it's safe. And or the case with other places, so it's just so interesting how this idea of community care, or what, some people also use the concept of radical self-care, thinking outside the box. And then we know that in the end, it's not even about me. It's about doing my best to stay engaged and then just to make whatever contribution I'm able to make.
I feel like so much of what you said really pushes back against this kind of, masculinist European ideology of like what ethnography is, that we're supposed to at some point leave the field so that we can gain objectivity. I guess feminist researchers, like you said, like we are always in community. This idea of like leaving the field in that particular way is not resonant at all. And I also think so much of what you said about maintaining intellectual curiosity and being teachable translates so easily into our next question, because as your former teaching assistant, that importance of intellectual curiosity is so very clear in your pedagogical approach. And so you approach your teaching as explicitly feminist. And over the years, you've taught a range of students. Nestor Rodriguez spoke to us about your commitment to mentoring students of color in particular at the university, both in and outside of the department. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you incorporate a feminist approach into your teaching?
I think one of the things is once a feminist, always a feminist, or almost always, or, as much as you can, you do your best. But it's this idea of teaching and also the classroom as a space of possibilities, as a space to invite people to become social critics, I remember in some of my classes, I think in most of my classes, especially undergrad classes, I tell them, I'm here to cause moral discomfort, the feminist killjoy. If you don't feel morally uncomfortable, I am not being a good teacher. I'm not doing a good job. And so then this idea of taking risks, I think that now that I am a more senior professor, you know, of course I can take risks as a teacher. I didn't do that when I was an assistant professor because you're evaluated, you have to get tenure, etc. Right? So it is different. So I think that finally I am much more relaxed also as a teacher and as a feminist. I think as an assistant professor, I was more concerned about coming across as self-confident, and probably that came across as more as intense or as this kind of fearless feminist. But I think that as I have become more senior, I went from being fearless to being fear-free. So now it's more like more relaxed, but also more open to helping the students to really bring in the entire stories when they come to class. You know, this idea of doing the check-in and the check-out to really help them explore other epistemologies, you know, other ways of constructing knowledge. You know that androcentric masculinist teaching is based on reason, working with ideas, etc. And I think for me is this idea of helping students feel knowledge. So how did you feel when you read about sexual violence against women during slavery, or sexual violence against men during slavery? Sexual violence against Native Americans, against immigrants, against gender non-conforming people, etc. You know, so then how did you feel when you were reading that? And then let's talk about it. And so then there's this idea of, you know, the feminist approach is just going beyond this more rigid thinking inside the box of reason, you know, just like open it up and invite them to explore those interconnections between what we're learning in class, what we're reading in class, and their own projects. And then how do you see your project in conversation with your family, community, social change, etc. I try to live my teaching or to experience my teaching journey or my experience as a teacher the same way I do research. It's like the spirit. It's just the same spirit is there. I miss my students. I miss my students tremendously. I miss the classroom. And just you know, just being in the same space, that kind of, you know, interaction, I truly, you know, miss them. And it breaks my heart to see that, you know, probably we're gonna be teaching online maybe for a year or so. But then there's creativity, right? So then we'll see, we'll see what, you know, we're able to do. I think as a feminist teacher, now that I'm more senior, I am also using myself for pedagogical reasons. Like one exercise that I have used in the past in one of my upper division classes, first day of class, okay? So I give them the syllabus, we go through the syllabus, etc. So the first exercise, okay? Okay, so the professor is a Mexican immigrant woman. Let's talk about it. What do you think about it? And no filters, okay, you are not gonna be punished. You are not gonna lose points, nothing. So, and it's actually really interesting. It's actually really interesting. It's actually fascinating. And then this idea of, instead of being politically correct, to be emotionally correct. So it is okay if you're confused, if you don't know what patriarchy is, if you don't know what transgender is, or what queer theory is, or cisgender, or whatever, you know, if that's the first time you're being exposed to the concept. But you're honest, it was a good idea to be, when you're honest, to be also respectful, to be aware of who is here, but not to compromise how you're feeling. So it's just like it's actually a really, I'm still learning how to be emotionally correct. It's not easy, but that's something that I try to do also in class. And also, you know, I think this idea of being intellectually vulnerable, that I may not have all of the answers to the questions. This idea of also showing some sort of vulnerability, intellectually speaking. But then it took time to get there, okay? So it took time. Yeah. So I hope I'm answering the question on the teaching.
But I am going to switch tracks a little bit to talk about the work that you've been doing in the department and in the university on behalf of students and faculty of color. Sharmila and you were the first women of color to be promoted to full professor in the department. Sharmila spoke to us about how critical it's been for her to have you here at UT as a colleague. You've also served as the department's minority liaison officer. You've co-authored the Hispanic Equity Report last year with 7 other UT professors, which really sort of highlights the systematic underpay and underrepresentation of Latinx faculty here at UT. So just in terms of your racial equity work, what have been some of your biggest takeaways from these experiences? Do you see hope in higher education as challenging these systems, or do you think we're just sitting here reproducing inequality? And I mean, especially in this moment, you know, when there's been so much conversation about universities and race, where do you really see us go from here?
Wow, thank you. Thank you. I think that's the question that I have all the time. That's the question I have all the time. I think that what we are going through socially, historically, culturally, is so visceral, you know, like it's so powerful. It's just really, really amazing to be alive to witness this, you know. I think that, you know, we're going through this moment that is really interesting, that is fascinating. But then the question is, you know, to what extent can we change structures? You know, is it possible? To what extent? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think that we just keep trying. You know, we just keep trying. When I met, you know, the professors at the Hispanic Equity Report, I didn't know who they were, and it was originally some professor from history, excuse me, and someone gave them my name for some reason. Oh, so yeah, so I met these professors from history and said, yeah, so yeah, we were told to meet with you. And I go, okay, so then we met, and then we had a conversation about inequality and this and that, and then I gave them, you know, other names, and then suddenly this is us, you know, the 8 of us. And I think that you know, higher education is rooted, you know, within a larger system, and this is intro to sociology 101. This is intro to sociology 101, and we see it, right? I mean, just we see it on campus. So then I think for me as a sociologist and as a feminist, is something that is also some sort of moral commitment. Does that make sense? Is like when I was approached by the professors, it was difficult for me to say, oh, no, I don't have time. You know, I have to teach. And you know, I'm a feminist professor, and I do research. And it's like, this is part of it. Like, this is part of it. You know, this is part of that conversation. So I think for me, it's just an ongoing process. It's a commitment. I think that when we become aware, like in our case, because we're in sociology, it's a beautiful, you know, I love our discipline because it gives us, you know, this kaleidoscope that we can turn around and just look at all of these different ways in which the colors and shapes and forms of inequality turn, you know, when we look at it critically. So then this idea of being part of these conversations to explore possibility. I think it's the idea to explore possibility, to be part of change, to be the public intellectual, the feminist professor. So it's like it is part of it. It validates our research, what our textbooks say, about social inequality. You become your own case study, and it's very powerful. So then, and then you discover, you look at ways in which this, could be changed. Yes, no, to some extent. You get some aha, moments. And it is an ongoing learning process. But definitely, institutions of higher education are rooted within society, and we live in a society that is racist, sexist, homophobic, incredibly patriarchal, and then we're part of it, and then we're trying to figure it out, and then to what extent can you change it? It doesn't happen overnight, but then probably you can unlock or move this link, and then you discover something. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Then in this particular case, what is so powerful is just to be in conversation with 7 people. I mean, we're 8 people, and all of us are trying to figure it out in conversation, through conversation. And we're from, different nationalities, disciplines, genders, etc. And it is very powerful. But then I'm still learning. But it is very difficult to change structures and inequality overnight. I have also learned that privilege, the people who enjoy privilege, it's difficult to let go of it. It must be very difficult. I mean, based on whatever privilege I may have, it must be difficult to let go of it, and to what extent you're willing to let go of it for the sake of the collective or collectivity or the institution, etc. It is an ongoing learning process, but it's important. And the other thing that is also really interesting is that the experience is also healing. It's like, I am not alone. I am not by myself. And then in the end, this is also about how can I help also the people, other people of color, people who have been working on these issues, and also the people who are in elementary school now, the people who are in high school now, the people who 20 years later or 30 years later are gonna come and say, hey, you knew this was going on and you didn't do anything. It's just becoming the professional feminist killjoy of color.
I feel like that is the best note to end on. Becoming a professional killjoy of color, a professional feminist killjoy of color.
Thank you so much, Gloria. I'm just going to, on behalf of Jamie and me, just say a very, very big thank you to you. This is an extremely well-deserved award, of course. We're incredibly proud of you, but we're also incredibly happy to have you in the life of our department and in our feminist lives. So here's to many more of these awards and much more time for interviewing.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much, Gloria.
Oh, thank you. I hope, I hope the conversation is of help, and thank you. I mean, it is an honor. It is an honor to be with both of you here today, and thank you. I mean, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the wonderful questions. And I hope I did justice to your wonderful questions.
You absolutely did.
It's been great to be part of, the life of my students. I think that's the this idea of, being in the life of a student, just to explore ways in which you can make a difference in someone's, life. In this particular case, as a teacher, as a professor, as a researcher, I think it's a special honor. Mm-hmm. And it has been helping me to also have a meaningful life. So I look forward to being 90 plus in my in my rocking chair, remembering, oh yeah, probably maybe I'm gonna be teaching.
I don't think you're retiring, Gloria.
Maybe I'm gonna be teaching. Who knows?
You'll be the most active professor emerita. What do they call it?
Emeritus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what. Yeah, I would love to. I would love to be really, really, really active and to remain active. But I think that teaching, doing research, and exploring ways to stay in community gives a lot of joy to my heart, and it is a special honor to be part of sociology and to be a feminist.